Hi there everyone, welcome back to Dandelion Delphi Tutorials. We are going to look at the final of 2017, question 1. At the end of a year, grade 10s should be able to complete this question, but definitely grade 11s and 12s. These older papers before 2018 were great practice because they're a little bit longer since they only consisted of 3 questions, so there's a lot more that we can practice by doing these past papers. So question 1.1 is typically your easy question. First of all, you just need to be aware of where you need to code. So you are on tab sheet that is named question 1.1, and that is where the panel that we're making changes to will appear, but that is not where we are placing the code. We have to write code in the onCreate event. And we're just going to display IT is fun, and we're going to change the background color of the panel to lime and the font size of the text to 15. Always read carefully when the question is asking you about the color, because it could ask you to change the color of the panel or maybe the color of the font, which would be 2 different sets of code. So I'm in Form Create and I'm changing the caption, IT is fun, and I'm changing the color, remember to misspell it like the Americans, and I'm going to change the color to lime. Now remember, if you're unsure on how to find the code for changing the color to lime, you are going to have a look in your object inspector. So to help you, just click on your panel that you want to change and then go and see, oh, there is the property called color. So I will have PNLQ1_1.color, and then here would be the list of colors that I can use. These are actually code written for each color. So we are not going to place CL lime in inverted commas. We're just going to use it as a function. The next part of the question asked us to change the font. So I will have to go to the panel.font, and you can see there's a plus sign there. If you click on the plus sign, you can see, oh, there is the size. So it is panel.font.size, and this line here represents your assignment statement. And on the right, if you see a number here, you'll just put it as an integer number on the right of the assignment statement. Just a reminder that if you had to change something to one of the styles in Delphi, let's say we had to display the font as bold, I'm going to make sure I'm on my panel, and then it will be the panel.font.style. And now I will place an assignment statement, and on the right of the assignment statement in square brackets, I will put one of these values. So for bold, I'm going to say FS bold, font style bold, or italics or underline or strike through, whatever the question was asking you to do. So here I've changed the color of the panel to lime, and here I'm changing the font size to 15. And this is just a reminder, this was really not asked, and this is how you would change to one of the styles. So .font.style is assigned to, and in square brackets, you will place one of those codes, FS bold or italics or underline. To clear a style, you will just use that code there. Now it's your turn to practice question 1.2.1. So have a look at the output here at the bottom. I'll show you the memo soon. Quite a few learners lost some marks here this year because the question said extract the numbers. That means you have to store them in variables. And then you want to compare the variables and not the values in the edit boxes. So make sure that you have used variables to then display the largest one or equal in the edit box provided. So this here was important, is to extract the numbers. And remember, the screenshot had integers, so you should also declare integer variables and then use string to int. If they were equal, you had to display equal in the edit box. Else, I'm testing if the number 1 is larger than number 2, then I will display number 1. And if it's not equal and number 1 is not the highest, then my only other option left is that number 2 must be the highest option. And that's why I don't have an if statement here in this else. I'm just displaying inum2. You can add an if statement here, but it's really not needed because we have only 3 options here. Again, this is your time to practice, so press pause and try it yourself. It was very important here to swap the contents of the two variables and not just display the input from the one edit box in the other. So you had to store it as variable and then use the same method of swapping values while you are sorting arrays. Here is the example of input and output. So very important that you first store the input from the user as strings and that you also have a temporary variable that will hold the first value. And we are still going to draw those lines from right to left to swap. So we place the first word on the right and then it goes on the left in the second line. And then it will be followed then by placing the second word in the first word variable. And in the last line here, the S word 2 is receiving the temporary value, which would be the word that was stored in S word 1. When you are swapping values in variables, think about having two glasses of water, one with red water in it and the other one with blue water in it. And you would like to swap the two contents, so the red water must go in the blue water's glass and the other way around. Now, the only way to do that is to have a third glass, and that is our stemp word, is our third glass, to just keep the value of the one word while I'm pouring the next word into that glass. So important was that in EDT word 1, we are displaying S word 1, and then the same for S word 2. We're going to move on to tab sheet 1.3. And here we have a little business that sells cakes. And in our combo box CMB num cakes, we have the values 1 to 10 stored, which is the number of cakes that someone wants to order. You are also provided with a whole bunch of pictures. And if you have a look at those files, they all start with picked, and then there's a number, and then .png. And this number corresponds with the number as entered by the user or selected by the user in your combo box. And the appropriate picture has to be displayed in the image IMG cake pick. Also important to notice that there was a constant variable price given that contains the value of 159.5, which is the price of one cake. Press pause and try this question yourself. Here is the rest of the question as well as some examples of input and output. We had to code on the inside of the on-click event of the combo box. So just double click on the combo box. You will see the constant price there was provided, and then you just continue to code down here. I've used the item index of the number of cakes plus 1 because the first item was 1 cake. So that would be item index 0 plus 1 will then give me 1. And the last item was 10 cakes, so the item index would be 9 plus 1, and I will store then 10 in inum cakes. I then had to calculate the cost of these cakes by multiplying them with the constant. And then I would provide the output in the edit box. Make sure you're using FF currency, 10, 2 to show the two decimal places. And then to load the picture, I had two options. The one is to write a very long case statement, or I could just build a string inside of .picture.load from file using the front part of the name of the file, which is picked for all of them, then the number of cakes, which is the input from the user, and then remember to add your .png at the end, and this will load then the correct picture for you. A case statement or nested if was possible by using the item index, but you are going to save yourself a lot of time by just building the name of the picture inside of the round brackets of load from file instead of having to write all of this code. So try button 3.2 yourself, press pause, I'll show you the memo soon. So now we first need to calculate how much sugar we need, and they explain to us here that a single cake requires 370 grams of sugar. But we can only buy packets of sugar in 1 kilograms. So the idea here is that if you calculate the sugar that you need in grams, you need to convert them to kilograms, but if you get 1.1 kilogram, you will need to buy 2 kilograms so that you have enough sugar for the cakes. You can't buy too little. So therefore we must make sure that our answer here is rounded up. The constant was provided, sugar, which contains 375. So I can take the global variable. This global variable was declared for you. It was part of provided code, and you were supposed to use it in question 1.3.1. But if you got to this question and you noticed that you needed that number of cakes, you probably would have noticed that there was a variable for you. Also remember now that this will now contain the gram, so we still need to divide by 1000. And then in order to get the value rounded up, I'm going to use ceil, and ceil will round the value for me up to the closest integer. And in the edit boxes here, I'm just displaying the grams as well as the number of sugar packets that I would need. The question paper did provide us with a math unit in the uses, but if you want to use ceil in one of your programs and it's underscored and the error will say it's undefined, then you just need to add math to the uses. Here you are required to place your code in the radio group. It sits on the tab sheet for question 1.4. A password is required, but only if the person is an owner or a staff member should the panel on which they enter the password become visible, else it must be invisible. Here is the example of output. So if it's an owner or a staff member, this panel here must become visible. If it's a customer, the panel must be invisible. I have two solutions for you here, and I'm sure there are many more. This is now coding inside of the radio group, and if the item index is a value of 0 or 2, I'm going to make my panel visible, and if they selected 1, then the panel will become invisible. This code is doing the same but using an in operator. So if the item index is 0 or 2, my panel will be visible, and else my panel will be invisible for the option 1. Now it is time for some string handling, so try question 1.4.2. So the first part here says extract the password from the edit box, and there was a global variable declared for you. Then you had to determine whether the password is valid or not by testing if it met the following criteria. So the first one here says that the length must be at least 6, so it can be more, but 6 is the minimum, and the first character must be a capital letter. And then the third bullet here says it must contain at least 2 special characters from this list provided. You have to display in the dialog box, and that means in a show message, and then enable the button and then clear the password edit box if it's not a valid password. So here is some examples of input and output. I would also test a password with a lowercase letter, starting with a lowercase letter, just to see that it does display that it's invalid. Maybe also try this one, but just add 1 special character and see if it's still saying it's an invalid password. So here's the input from the user, and I'm starting with be valid as true. And if there's something wrong with my password, I then change be valid to false. I've done the length here as well as the first character as a capital letter in one if statement. So this is saying if either the length is less than 6 or the first character is not a character from A to Z, then I'm going to change be valid to false. For the next part, I needed a loop because I have to count the number of special characters. So if I'm counting, I always need to initialize, so that's why I count as 0. And now I'm looping from 1 to the length of the password, testing each character to see if it is either one of these 4 characters. And if it is, I increment my counter. So now outside of this for loop, I can test if the counter is less than 2, because I have to have a minimum of 2 special characters. Then I will change my valid Boolean variable to false. And the bottom part here was just testing if be valid is true, and then I will display a message in the show message, and I will enable my button. If be valid is false, I then display this message and remember to clear the edit box EDT password. Now try button 4.3. We had to encrypt this password by only changing the first character to its next character. But if the character is a Z, then it must become an A. Make sure that you also test your program with a password that starts with a Z. So what I've done in here is I've tested if the first character is a Z, and if it is, I replace it with an A. If it's not a Z, I then just ink that character, because you can use ink on ordinal values, on integers and chars, and that will change that character to the next character in the ASCII table. And then finally just display your global variable as password. And now we move on to the tab sheet 1.5 and try the button for the perfect square. Here are now two examples. Since both examples had the output at the top of the rich edit, I have added a dot clear for my rich edit. Then we need to get input from the user for the number that they want to enter, and I'm going to store that as an integer. There are many ways of finding whether a number is a perfect square, but here are two solutions for you. The first one here is testing if the square root of the number is the same as the rounded value of the square root of the number. So if it wasn't a perfect square, the answer on the left side here would have some decimal values. And once I round that, this one won't have the decimal value, so they won't be equal. So then it won't be a perfect square. If I square root the number, let's say 16, the answer here would be 4.0. Rounding it would be 4, so therefore it would be a perfect square. Another method would be to use frac. Frac extracts your decimal values after the decimal point from a real number. So if the frac of the square root of the number is 0, it means it is a perfect square. And here is the final button to practice. Press pause, I'll show you the memo soon. So in this sequence, we're always going to start with 1, and then the next term is then found by multiplying that term by 3. So 1 times 3 is 3, 3 times 3 is 9, 9 times 3 is 27. What is important is that you have to use a conditional loop as per the question, and that the loop should stop when the sum of the terms in the sequence exceeds the value of 1000. So have a look at my solution so that you're sure you use the correct code. Another constant was provided. That was my multiplier with 3, so make sure that you make use of it. And I am going to start my sum, my total, as the value 1, because if I should start it at 0, I will, because of the next code, I'm going to exclude 1. So I term is going to start at 1. Since I'm multiplying, I can't start it at 0, because then I will be multiplying everything by 0. My term will stay 0. I'm then also initializing my output string as the number 1. And on the inside of my loop, I'm first going to show you the repeat loop, is I am finding the next term. So the next term is the current term times by 3. So I term will give me the next term, and then I add that term to my output string. In the next line here, I'm now adding up the total. So I am adding all the terms together to find the total. And it's this total here that I need to make sure that I test in my condition. So I'm going to repeat until this total is greater than 1000. And then I will display snum, which will provide me now with the terms next to each other in my rich edit. In this next solution, I am going to use a while loop. And remember, when we're using a while loop, we need to initialize, test, and then change the same variable. So the initialization at the top is all the same, but my condition for my while loop sits at the top, and I want to test while the total is less or equal to 1000, I will continue to find the next term. The code on the inside between the begin and the end matches that of my repeat loop, and then I just display the number at the end. Thank you for watching Dandelion Delphi tutorials. If you need more information about string handling and loops, that you will find in my book 1. Hope to see you soon!